I was getting ready for my son's wedding when a lawyer sent me a message. I need to talk to you. It's urgent. When I called him back, he told me what my son was plotting. It froze my blood. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I was adjusting my tie in the mirror when my phone rang. The sound echoed through my empty bedroom, the same bedroom I'd shared with Margaret for 35 years before cancer took her from me 3 years ago. Today was supposed to be a celebration. Barry, my only son, was getting married to Claire, a sweet girl who seemed to genuinely care about him. At 62, I thought I'd finally see my boy settle down and start a family of his own. The caller ID showed Harrison and Associates, my attorney's office. I almost didn't answer. David Harrison had been Margaret's lawyer first, then mine after she passed. He rarely called on weekends, especially not on a Saturday morning when he knew I had somewhere important to be. "David?" I answered, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "This better be urgent. I need to be at the church in 2 hours. Melvin." His voice was tight, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "I need to see you immediately. Don't go to the wedding yet." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? Barry's getting married today. I'm not missing my son's wedding for paperwork." "Melvin, please, just come to my office. What I have to show you, it can't wait." There was something in his tone that made my hands shake. David had been practicing law for over 30 years. He'd handled Margaret's will, her medical decisions, everything. He wasn't the type to panic over nothing. "Can't you just tell me over the phone?" A long pause. "It's about Barry and Margaret's estate." I found some irregularities while reviewing documents for the wedding. The words hit me like a physical blow. Irregularities. What kind of irregularities could there possibly be? Margaret had been meticulous about her affairs. Everything was supposed to be straightforward. 20 minutes later, I sat across from David in his mahogany-paneled office, still wearing my wedding suit. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, dressed to celebrate my son's new beginning, about to learn something that would shatter everything I thought I knew about him. David spread several documents across his desk, his face grave. "I was updating some files yesterday when I noticed discrepancies in Margaret's will execution. These documents here," he pointed to a stack of papers, "show transfers that were never authorized." I leaned forward, squinting at the legal jargon. "What kind of transfers?" "Your house, Melvin. The one Margaret left to you. According to these papers, you signed it over to Barry 6 months ago." He pulled out another document. "Same with her life insurance payout, and the savings account she specifically designated for your care." The room started spinning. "That's impossible. I never signed anything like that." David's expression grew darker. I compared the signatures. "They're forgeries, Melvin. Very good ones, but forgeries nonetheless." He pulled out a magnifying glass and showed me the differences. Subtle variations in the way I dotted my I's, the pressure of the pen strokes. I felt sick. But I did sign some papers Barry brought me. He said they were routine maintenance forms for the house, insurance updates. When was this? I tried to remember through the fog of disbelief. Around Christmas. Barry said he wanted to help me organize Margaret's affairs, make sure everything was in order. He brought a whole folder of documents. Said it was easier if I signed them all at once. David nodded grimly. "He substituted the real documents with forgeries after you signed. Look at this." He showed me my actual signature on a blank piece of paper, then the forged signature on the property transfer. "He traced your signature onto the real legal documents." My chest tightened. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, had stolen everything Margaret left me. "How much?" "Everything, Melvin. The house is worth $400,000. The life insurance was $200,000. The savings account had another $150,000. David's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's taken everything she wanted you to have." I slumped back in the chair, feeling every one of my 62 years. But why? He has a good job. He's getting married. I did some digging after I found these discrepancies. David pulled out another folder. Barry's been in significant debt for over a year. Gambling debts, credit cards maxed out. He needed money, and he knew about Margaret's estate. The betrayal cut deeper than Margaret's death. At least with cancer, I could see the enemy. This was my own son, the person I trusted most in the world. "There's more," David said quietly. "According to these financial records, he's been planning this for months. The wedding expenses, the honeymoon to Europe, even Claire's engagement ring, all paid for with your money. I thought about all the times Barry had visited in the past 6 months, how attentive he'd been, how he'd insisted on helping with my finances. He's been planning this since Margaret's funeral, it looks like. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. My son had started planning to steal from me while we were still grieving his mother. While I was lost in grief, barely able to function, he was calculating how to take everything she'd left me. What can we do? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. We can file criminal charges. We can reverse the transfers. But Melvin. David hesitated. This will destroy him, and it might take months to get your assets back. I stared at the documents spread across the desk, evidence of my son's betrayal, written in black and white. In 3 hours, Barry would be standing at an altar, promising to love and honor his new wife, while living off money he'd stolen from his grieving father. He doesn't know that I know? No. As far as he's concerned, everything went according to plan. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. Then I'm going to that wedding. David looked surprised. Melvin, I don't think that's wise. You're in shock. You should go home, rest. Let me handle the legal aspects. No. My voice was stronger now, fueled by a rage I'd never felt before. I'm going to watch my son get married with my dead wife's money, and then we're going to see just how much Barry values family. I arrived at St. Matthew's Episcopal Church 40 minutes late, my hands still trembling from what David had revealed. The parking lot was full of cars I recognized, Barry's friends from college, my neighbors, Margaret's sister Ruth, who had driven down from Portland. Everyone here to celebrate what they thought was a joyous occasion, while I now knew it was built on theft and lies. The ceremony had already begun. I could hear the organ playing through the heavy wooden doors as I stood on the church steps, trying to compose myself. How do you walk into your son's wedding knowing he's stolen everything from you? How do you smile and play the proud father when all you want to do is scream? I slipped into the back pew as quietly as possible. The church was decorated beautifully, white roses and baby's breath everywhere, exactly the kind of elegant setup Margaret would have loved. The sight of it made my chest tighten. These flowers, this venue, the string quartet playing in the corner, all paid for with money Barry had stolen from his dead mother's estate. There he stood at the altar, looking handsome in his black tuxedo. My son, the little boy I'd taught to throw a baseball, who used to crawl into bed with Margaret and me during thunderstorms. He was smiling broadly, his face glowing with happiness, and for a moment I felt a stab of doubt. Could David be wrong? Could there be some explanation? Then I saw Claire walking down the aisle in what had to be a $5,000 dress, and the doubt vanished. Barry made decent money as an accountant, but not this kind of money. Not wedding at the country club money. Not honeymoon in Tuscany money. As Claire reached the altar, Barry's eyes swept the congregation. When he spotted me in the back, his face lit up even more. He gave me a small wave, that same enthusiastic gesture he'd used since he was 5 years old. The innocence of it made me want to vomit. Dearly beloved, the minister began, we are gathered here today to join Barry and Claire in holy matrimony. Holy matrimony. I wondered if the minister would feel differently about blessing their union if he knew it was funded by fraud. I watched Barry throughout the entire ceremony, studying his face, looking for any sign of guilt or remorse. But there was nothing. He looked like any other groom, nervous, happy, completely focused on his bride. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and clear. I promise to love and cherish you, to be honest and faithful, to support you through all of life's challenges. Honest. The word echoed in my mind. Barry promising to be honest with his new wife while living a lie built on stealing from his own father. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the union, I felt every muscle in my body tense. For a wild moment, I considered standing up, announcing what I knew. But something held me back. Maybe it was the fact that Claire looked genuinely happy. Maybe it was the presence of 200 guests who would be devastated to learn the truth. Or maybe it was the father in me that still wanted to protect Barry, even after what he'd done. The ceremony concluded with the traditional kiss, and everyone erupted in applause. I clapped along mechanically, watching as Barry and Claire practically floated back down the aisle, beaming at their guests. When Barry spotted me again, he broke away from Claire for a moment and made his way over. Dad. He wrapped me in a tight hug, and I had to fight every instinct not to push him away. I'm so glad you made it. I was worried when you were late. Just had some business to take care of, I managed, my voice sounding surprisingly normal. Congratulations, son. Thanks, Dad. This means everything to me, having you here. His eyes were actually misty with emotion. I know Mom would have loved this day. The mention of Margaret was like a knife between my ribs. Yes, I said quietly. She would have. Claire appeared at Barry's side, radiant in her wedding dress. Mr. Fletcher, thank you so much for walking me through all those financial details last month. Barry said you were such a help with organizing everything for the wedding. My blood turned to ice. Financial details? Barry jumped in quickly. Dad, you remember when you helped us figure out the budget, made sure we could afford everything? I stared at him. Not only had he stolen from me, but he was now making it seem like I had willingly funded their elaborate wedding. In front of his new wife, he was rewriting history to make himself look like the dutiful son who had his father's blessing and support. Of course, I heard myself say. Happy to help. Claire squeezed my arm. You're such a generous father. Barry always talks about how lucky he is to have you. Lucky. Barry felt lucky to have a father he could rob blind. The reception was being held at the Riverside Country Club, a venue I'd driven past hundreds of times but never imagined I'd be inside. As I walked through the elegantly decorated ballroom, I started doing rough calculations in my head. The flowers alone had to cost $3,000. The band was a well-known local group that charged premium rates. The open bar was stocked with top-shelf liquor. I found my assigned seat at the family table, right next to Ruth and her husband Jim. Ruth immediately grabbed my arm. Melvin, this is incredible. Barry really went all out. You must be so proud. Yes, I said, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. He certainly spared no expense. Margaret would have been over the moon, Ruth continued. She always said Barry would find a good girl and settle down. And Claire seems lovely. I nodded, watching Barry and Claire make their rounds to the various tables, accepting congratulations and good wishes. Every smile, every laugh, every expression of joy felt like another betrayal. They were celebrating with stolen money, accepting praise for a wedding funded by fraud. During dinner, Barry stood up to make a toast. The room fell quiet as he tapped his champagne glass with a spoon. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Claire and I are so grateful to have the love and support of our families and friends. He looked directly at me. I especially want to thank my dad, who has been my rock since we lost Mom. Dad, I know this hasn't been easy for you, being here without her, but your strength and generosity have made this day possible. The room erupted in applause, and everyone turned to look at me expectantly. I was supposed to stand up, acknowledge the praise, maybe say a few words about how proud I was. Instead, I sat frozen in my chair, staring at my son as he continued his performance. My father taught me the importance of family, of taking care of the people you love. He's shown me what it means to be a good man, and I can only hope to be half the father to my children that he's been to me. More applause. Ruth was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Jim was nodding approvingly. And Barry was looking at me with what appeared to be genuine love and admiration. That's when it hit me. Barry actually believed what he was saying. In his mind, he hadn't stolen from me. He'd simply taken what he was entitled to. He saw Margaret's estate as his inheritance, and my ownership of it as a temporary inconvenience. He wasn't a criminal in his own mind. He was just a son who had expedited the inevitable. The realization was almost worse than the theft itself. Not only had Barry stolen from me, but he felt completely justified in doing so. And now, surrounded by friends and family, he was being celebrated for his character and family values, while living off the money he'd taken from his grieving father. As the evening wore on and the dancing began, I found myself studying Claire more carefully. Did she know? When Barry had suddenly been able to afford this extravagant wedding, had she asked questions? When he'd presented her with a 3-carat diamond engagement ring that should have been far beyond their means, had she wondered where the money came from? I watched her laughing with her bridesmaids, completely carefree and happy. If she did know about Barry's theft, she was an excellent actress. But then again, so was Barry. Around 10 o'clock, as the reception was winding down, Barry approached me again. He'd had several drinks, and his face was flushed with alcohol and happiness. Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something, he said, guiding me away from the crowd toward a quiet corner of the ballroom. Claire and I have been thinking about our future, about starting a family. I nodded, not trusting my voice. We're going to need a bigger place, he continued. And I know you're rattling around in that big house all by yourself. We were thinking, maybe it's time you considered downsizing, moving somewhere more manageable. The audacity of it took my breath away. Not only had he already stolen my house through forged documents, but now he was going to manipulate me into thinking it was my idea to give it up. What kind of place were you thinking? I asked carefully. Well, there's this really nice assisted living community about 20 minutes from here. Golden Years Village. I've already talked to them and they have some great options. You'd have your own apartment, but there'd be people around to help with meals, cleaning, that sort of thing. Assisted living. He wanted to put me in assisted living so he could have complete control over what was left of my life and my assets. I'm only 62, Barry. I'm hardly ready for assisted living. He laughed and patted my shoulder. I know. But think about how much easier it would be. No more worrying about house maintenance, yard work, all that stuff. And you'd make new friends. It could be really good for you, Dad. I looked at my son, my only child, the person I'd loved and supported and sacrificed for his entire life, and I saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't just a thief. He was calculating, manipulative, and utterly without conscience. He had planned not just to steal from me, but to isolate me and control me for the rest of my life. That's something to think about, I said finally. Barry's smile widened. Great. I'll set up a tour for next week. You're going to love it, Dad. This is going to be so much better for both of us. As he walked away to rejoin his new wife, I realized that my son hadn't just stolen my money and my house. He'd stolen something far more precious. He'd stolen the man I thought he was. The Monday morning after the wedding, I sat in my kitchen staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. The house felt different now that I knew it wasn't really mine anymore. Every creak of the floorboards, every familiar shadow on the wall, it all felt borrowed, temporary. Barry had stolen more than just property and money. He'd stolen my sense of home. I'd barely slept since Saturday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Barry's face during his toast, the way he'd looked at me with what seemed like genuine affection while describing my generosity. The manipulation was so complete, so calculated, that I wondered how long he'd been planning this. Had he started plotting while Margaret was still alive? Had he been waiting for her to die so he could put his plan into motion? By Tuesday, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. David Harrison was excellent with legal matters, but what I needed now was someone who could dig deeper, someone who could uncover the full extent of Barry's deception. I needed a private investigator. I found Marcus Webb through an online search. His website was simple and professional, 20 years of experience, specializing in financial fraud and family matters. When I called his office, his secretary scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Webb's office was in a modest building downtown, nothing fancy or intimidating. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with graying hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested he'd seen plenty of human ugliness and wasn't easily surprised. "Mr. Fletcher," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Tell me what's going on." I explained everything. The forged documents, the stolen assets, Barry's suggestion about assisted living. Webb listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "How much are we talking about total?" he asked when I finished. "Around $750,000 plus the house." He whistled softly. "That's felony territory. Your son's looking at serious prison time if this goes to court." The words hit me hard. Prison time. My son, behind bars. I just want to understand the full scope of what he's done before I decide how to proceed. Webb nodded. "Smart approach. In my experience, when someone pulls off something this elaborate, it's rarely their first rodeo. Let me do some digging, see what else I can find." "How long will that take?" "Give me a week. I'll start with his financial records, see if there are other victims, check his employment history for any red flags." He leaned forward. "Mr. Fletcher, I have to ask, are you prepared for what I might find? Sometimes these investigations uncover things that are worse than what we started with." I thought about Barry's face at the wedding, the easy way he'd lied to his new wife about my help with the wedding expenses. I think I need to know the truth, whatever it is. Webb called me Friday morning. "We need to meet. My office, 2 o'clock. The tone in his voice made my stomach clench. I spent the intervening hours trying to prepare myself for whatever he'd discovered, but nothing could have readied me for what he laid out across his desk that afternoon. "Your son has been busy," Webb began, opening a thick folder. "The good news is that you're his only victim in terms of the property fraud. The bad news is that this goes much deeper than we thought." He pulled out a stack of bank statements. "Barry's been systematically draining your accounts for 8 months, not just since the wedding planning started. Small amounts at first, 50 here, 100 there. Amounts small enough that you wouldn't notice, especially if you weren't checking your statements carefully. I felt sick. How much? $38,000 over 8 months, separate from the larger theft. He had access to your online banking, probably got your passwords when he was helping you organize your finances after your wife's death. Webb pulled out another document. But here's where it gets interesting. I ran a credit check on Barry, looked into his employment history, talked to some people who know him. He paused. Your son has a gambling problem, Mr. Fletcher, a serious one. The words seemed to echo in the small office. Gambling, online poker, sports betting, trips to the casino. I spoke with a bartender at the Riverside Casino who knows him by name. Says Barry's been a regular for over 2 years, usually loses big. I thought about all the evenings Barry had said he was working late, all the weekend trips he'd claimed were work conferences. How much does he owe? Near as I can figure, about $60,000 in various debts. Credit cards, personal loans, money borrowed from friends. Webb pulled out a printout. This is his credit report. It's a disaster. His credit cards are maxed out. He's behind on his car payment, and he owes money to at least 3 different loan sharks that I can identify. The room felt like it was spinning. My son wasn't just a thief. He was an addict with dangerous debts. Does Claire know? I doubt it. Barry's been very careful to keep his 2 lives separate. At work, he's the responsible accountant. At home, he's the devoted son and fiancé. But in private, he's been spiraling for years. Webb reached for another folder. There's more. I looked into his employment record, called around to some of his previous jobs. He was fired from his position at Henderson & Associates 3 years ago. Fired? But he told me he left to find better opportunities. He was let go for financial irregularities. They suspected he was skimming from client accounts, but they couldn't prove it. Rather than press charges, they just quietly dismissed him and agreed not to give him a bad reference as long as he didn't try to practice accounting in their city again. I slumped back in the chair. 3 years ago was right around the time Margaret got her terminal diagnosis. While I was focused on caring for my dying wife, Barry was stealing from his employers and planning his next move. His current job is likely temporary, Webb continued. I spoke with someone at his firm, off the record. There have been some questions about missing petty cash, office supplies ordered but never delivered. Nothing major enough to fire him over yet, but they're watching him. The picture Webb was painting was of a man whose entire life was built on deception and theft. But there was one more revelation that nearly knocked me off my chair. I also looked into the assisted living facility he mentioned to you, Webb said, pulling out a brochure for Golden Years Village. I called them, pretended to be a family member inquiring about costs. And? It's not assisted living, Mr. Fletcher. It's a full-care nursing facility. The kind of place where residents have minimal independence and limited contact with the outside world. Webb's expression was grim. I spoke with one of their intake coordinators. Someone matching your son's description has already been asking about admission requirements, costs, and visiting policies. The implication hit me like a physical blow. He's planning to have me declared incompetent. That would be my guess. Once you're in a place like Golden Years, isolated from your friends and neighbors, it would be easy for him to gradually take control of every aspect of your life, your mail, your phone calls, your medical decisions. I thought about Barry's suggestion that I downsize, his comments about how much easier life would be without the responsibilities of home ownership. He hadn't been trying to help me. He'd been laying the groundwork for my imprisonment. There's one more thing, Webb said quietly. I found evidence that Barry's been researching legal guardianship procedures. He's downloaded forms, visited websites, even contacted a lawyer who specializes in competency hearings. He wants to have me declared mentally incompetent. It's the perfect crime when you think about it. Once he's your legal guardian, he has access to everything, your remaining assets, your medical decisions, where you live, who you can see, and if you're locked away in a nursing facility, who's going to listen if you try to tell them you're being robbed? I sat in stunned silence, trying to process the full scope of my son's betrayal. This wasn't just theft. It was a comprehensive plan to destroy my independence and control every aspect of my remaining years. What's my next move? I asked finally. Webb closed the folders and looked at me seriously. That depends on what you want to accomplish. We have enough evidence to send Barry to prison for a very long time. The forgery alone is a felony, and add in the systematic theft, the ongoing fraud. He shrugged. He'd be looking at 10 to 15 years minimum. But that might not get you your money back, and it would definitely destroy his marriage, his career, any chance he has at a normal life. Webb leaned back in his chair. On the other hand, if Barry thinks he's getting away with it, he'll just get bolder. Men like your son don't stop on their own. I thought about Claire, innocent and happy in her new marriage. I thought about Barry's friends and colleagues who knew him as a responsible young man. But mostly I thought about Margaret and what she would want me to do. I need some time to think about this, I said. Webb nodded. Take all the time you need. But Mr. Fletcher, don't wait too long. According to my sources, Barry's already started the paperwork to have you evaluated for competency. You might have less time than you think. As I drove home through the familiar streets of the neighborhood where I'd raised Barry, I realized that my son had given me a choice. I could be the victim of his elaborate scheme, or I could turn the tables and become something I'd never been before. I could become the one in control. The plan came to me Sunday night as I sat in Margaret's garden, watching the roses she'd planted the year before she died. They were blooming beautifully now, deep red petals that reminded me of her favorite lipstick. She'd always been the strategist in our family, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while I focused on the immediate problem. If Margaret were here, she'd tell me that Barry had made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated his father. Monday morning, I called David Harrison and asked him to meet me at my house. When he arrived, I was sitting at the kitchen table with all of Webb's findings spread out in front of me. "Jesus, Melvin," David said after reading through the investigator's report. "This is worse than we thought. Much worse. But it's also given me an idea." I leaned forward. "Barry thinks he's playing chess while I'm playing checkers. What if we let him keep thinking that?" David frowned. "What do you mean?" "Barry's plan depends on me being the confused, grieving widower who doesn't pay attention to details. What if I become exactly that person? What if I make it so easy for him that he gets careless and shows his hand completely?" I explained my plan. David listened with growing amazement and, I thought, a hint of admiration. "It's risky," he said when I finished. "If Barry realizes what you're doing, he won't. You know why? Because he's so convinced of his own superiority that he can't imagine me outmaneuvering him." I gathered up the papers. "Besides, what's the alternative? Let him put me in a nursing home and steal what's left of my life?" David was quiet for a long moment. "You'll need to be very careful. One slip and this whole thing falls apart. I've been careful my whole life, David. Look where it got me." The performance began that very afternoon. Barry called around 3 o'clock, just as he had every few days since the wedding. "Hi, Dad. How are you doing?" "Oh, fine. I let my voice sound slightly confused, a little tired. Though I have to admit, I've been feeling a bit scattered lately. Scattered? Just little things. Yesterday I couldn't remember where I put my car keys. Found them in the refrigerator." I forced out a nervous laugh. "And I've been having trouble with some of the bills. The electric company sent me a notice, but I could have sworn I already paid it." There was a pause on Barry's end. I could practically hear his mind working. "That doesn't sound like you, Dad." "I know. It's probably nothing. Just getting older, I guess." I let my voice trail off. "Maybe you were right about that place you mentioned, Golden Years Village. Maybe I should at least take a look." "Really?" Barry's voice brightened noticeably. "That's great, Dad. I think it could really help you. Less stress, people around to help with the day-to-day stuff. Could you set up a tour?" "I'm not sure I trust myself to make the arrangements properly." "Of course. I'll call them first thing tomorrow." After I hung up, I felt sick to my stomach. Acting helpless went against every instinct I had. But I reminded myself that this was war, and in war, sometimes you had to retreat before you could advance. Over the next few days, I carefully constructed the image of a man in cognitive decline. I called Barry with concerns about bills I'd allegedly forgotten to pay. I mentioned getting confused about dates and appointments. I even went so far as to show up at the grocery store in my slippers, making sure to run into Mrs. Henderson from next door, who I knew would mention it to Barry the next time she saw him. The tour of Golden Years Village was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Barry picked me up, chattering excitedly about how much I was going to love the place. "They have activities every day, Dad. Card games, movie nights, even field trips to the mall and restaurants." He glanced at me as we drove. "And the best part is, you won't have to worry about anything. They handle all the meal planning, the cleaning, even managing medications if needed." Golden Years was exactly what Webb had described. A nursing facility disguised as an upscale retirement community. The lobby was cheerfully decorated with artificial flowers and motivational posters, but I could see the locked doors, the call buttons on every wall, the way the staff spoke to the residents in the patronizing tone you'd use with children. Our tour guide was a woman named Sandra who spoke exclusively to Barry, as if I weren't capable of understanding what she was saying. "Your father would be very comfortable here," she told Barry as we walked through the dining room, where elderly residents sat at tables, many looking vacant or medicated. "We have excellent care for residents with cognitive issues." "Cognitive issues?" I said, letting my voice sound worried. "I don't have cognitive issues. I just get a little confused sometimes." Sandra smiled at me with practiced sympathy. "Of course, dear. That's perfectly normal. We see it all the time." Barry squeezed my shoulder. "It's okay, Dad. There's no shame in needing help." As we toured the facility, I noticed details that Barry seemed oblivious to. The residents' rooms were small and sparse, with locks on the outside of the doors. The common areas had security cameras in every corner. The staff wore keys on retractable cords, and I noticed that several doors required keycard access. "What about visitors?" I asked Sandra as we finished the tour. "Oh, we encourage family involvement. Visiting hours are Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday from 2 to 4. 6 hours a week. Barry would be able to visit me for 6 hours a week, while having complete control over my life for the remaining 162 hours. The admission process is fairly straightforward." Sandra continued, addressing Barry again. "We'll need medical records, financial information, and usually a recommendation from a physician regarding care needs." "What kind of recommendation?" Barry asked. "Just a standard assessment of cognitive function, ability to live independently, that sort of thing. Many families find it helpful to have a competency evaluation done first. It makes the transition smoother for everyone involved." There it was, the competency evaluation Barry had been researching. He was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent and then use that declaration to justify putting me in this place. On the drive home, Barry was more animated than I'd seen him since the wedding. "What did you think, Dad? Sandra seemed really nice, and the place looked great." "It was very nice," I said carefully, "but I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that yet." Barry's jaw tightened slightly. "Dad, I think it might be time to be realistic about your situation. You're having memory issues, you're struggling with basic tasks. What happens if you fall and no one finds you for hours? What if you forget to turn off the stove and burn the house down?" "I suppose you're right." I let my voice sound defeated. It's hard to admit that I can't take care of myself anymore. I know it is. But this isn't about admitting defeat. It's about getting the help you need." He reached over and patted my hand. "Tell you what, why don't I talk to your doctor about getting you evaluated? Just to see where you stand cognitively. That way, we'll have a better idea of what level of care you actually need." "Perfect." Barry was walking right into the trap. "That sounds like a good idea," I said. "You always were the smart one in the family." Barry smiled, apparently pleased with himself. "I'll call Dr. Morrison first thing Monday morning." That weekend, I had one more crucial conversation with David Harrison. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, after I explained how I wanted him to handle the competency evaluation. "I'm sure. Barry thinks he's manipulating me into this evaluation, but what he doesn't realize is that I'm going to manipulate the evaluation itself." David shook his head. "If this backfires, it won't. You've known Dr. Morrison for 20 years. He'll understand what we need him to do." Dr. Morrison had been Margaret's physician as well as mine for the past decade. He'd seen us through her cancer diagnosis, her treatment, her death. He knew exactly how sharp I was mentally, and he also knew that I wasn't the type of man to fabricate an illness for sympathy. When I explained the situation to him, his reaction was immediate and angry. "That son of a bitch," he said, then immediately apologized for the language. "Sorry, Melvin, but this is exactly the kind of elder abuse we're trained to watch for. Your son is trying to have you institutionalized so he can steal from you. Which is why I need your help," I explained. "Barry's going to ask you to evaluate my cognitive function. I need you to find exactly what he wants you to find." "Doctor." Morrison leaned back in his chair, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You want me to diagnose you with dementia? Mild cognitive impairment, maybe early-stage dementia. Nothing too severe. Barry needs to believe I'm declining but not completely gone yet. He still needs me functional enough to sign documents. This is incredibly risky, Melvin. If word gets out that I falsified a medical evaluation, it won't. And once this is over, you can re-evaluate me and discover that my condition has miraculously stabilized. Doctor. Morrison was quiet for a long time, staring out his office window at the parking lot where Barry and I had sat in the car so many times over the years, waiting for Margaret's appointments. "What that boy is doing to you," he said finally. "It's exactly what happened to my own father-in-law. His son had him declared incompetent and stuck him in a facility so he could raid his bank accounts. My father-in-law died there, alone and confused, while his son lived it up on his money. He turned back to me, his expression resolute. "Okay, Melvin, I'll do it, but we need to be very careful about how we handle this." Monday afternoon, Barry called me, practically vibrating with excitement. "Great news, Dad. I talked to Dr. Morrison and he can see you Thursday for a comprehensive evaluation. He wants to run some cognitive tests just to get a baseline." "Do you think that's really necessary?" I asked, letting doubt creep into my voice. "Dad, we need to know what we're dealing with. And honestly, I think having an official evaluation might actually be a relief for you. At least then we'll know for sure what's going on." "All right, if you think it's best." "I do. And Dad, I want you to know how proud I am of you for being so proactive about this. It takes courage to admit when you need help." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about the irony of Barry's words. He was proud of me for walking into his trap, but what he didn't realize was that I was proud of him too, proud of how thoroughly he was revealing his true character. By Thursday afternoon, Barry would have the medical documentation he needed to have me declared incompetent. By the end of the month, I'd probably be a resident of Golden Years Village, with Barry as my legal guardian and complete control over my assets. At least that's what Barry thought was going to happen. What Barry didn't know was that David Harrison was already preparing documents of his own. What he didn't know was that Marcus Webb had installed hidden cameras in my house and was recording every conversation between us. And what he definitely didn't know was that his father had learned to play chess. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared for what Barry believed would be my cognitive evaluation with Dr. Morrison. I'd barely slept, running through the plan over and over in my mind. Everything had to be perfectly timed. One mistake, and Barry would realize he'd been outmaneuvered. Barry picked me up at 9:30, chattering nervously during the drive to Dr. Morrison's office. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the steering wheel just a little too tightly. He was excited about the evaluation results he expected, but there was something else too. Anxiety about what might go wrong. "You don't need to be nervous, Dad," he said as we pulled into the medical complex parking lot. "Dr. Morrison is just going to ask you some simple questions, maybe have you do a few mental exercises. Nothing scary." "I know, son. I'm just worried about what he might find." Barry reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever happens, I'll be here for you. We'll face this together." The irony of his words made my stomach turn. Barry thought he was comforting a confused old man who was about to receive devastating news about his mental decline. What he didn't know was that he was about to receive some devastating news of his own. Doctor. Morrison's waiting room was crowded with the usual mix of elderly patients and worried family members. Barry and I took seats near the window, and I watched him fidget with his phone, checking the time every few minutes. "Mr. Fletcher?" A nurse appeared at the door to the back offices. "Dr. Morrison will see you now." Barry started to stand, but the nurse held up a hand. "Just the patient for now. The doctor will call you back when he's ready to discuss the results." I saw a flicker of frustration cross Barry's face, but he sat back down. "I'll be right here, Dad." "Doctor." Morrison's office looked exactly the same as it had for the past 10 years. The same diplomas on the wall, the same family photos on his desk, the same worn leather chair where Margaret used to sit during her appointments. Seeing it now, knowing what I was about to do, felt like a betrayal of her memory. "How are you holding up, Melvin?" Dr. Morrison asked as he closed the door behind us. "About as well as can be expected, considering I'm about to fake dementia to catch my son stealing from me." Dr. Morrison shook his head. "I've been thinking about this all weekend, what Barry's doing. It's elder abuse, plain and simple. If we don't stop him now, he'll just get worse." We spent the next 45 minutes going through the motions of a cognitive evaluation. Dr. Morrison asked me questions about dates, had me do some simple math problems, tested my memory with word lists. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a standard assessment. What they wouldn't have seen was Dr. Morrison coaching me on which questions to answer incorrectly, which tests to fail in subtle ways. Remember, he said quietly as we neared the end, mild cognitive impairment means you're functional but declining. You can still live independently for now, but you'll need increasing support over time. And that's exactly what Barry wants to hear. Dr. Morrison nodded grimly. He wants you just impaired enough to justify taking control, but not so far gone that you can't sign documents when he needs you to. When we finished, Dr. Morrison called Barry into his office. I watched my son's face as he took the seat next to mine, trying to look concerned while barely containing his anticipation. "Well, doctor," Barry asked. "How did he do?" Dr. Morrison put on his most professional expression. "I'm afraid the results are consistent with what you suspected, Barry. Your father is showing signs of mild cognitive impairment, possibly early-stage dementia." Barry's face fell into an expression of carefully practiced concern. "How bad is it?" "He's still functional for now, but I'm seeing short-term memory issues. Some confusion about dates and sequences of events, difficulty with complex problem-solving." Dr. Morrison looked at me with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, Melvin. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." I let my shoulders sag. "So it's real? It's not just normal aging?" "I'm afraid not. The good news is that this is still in the early stages. With proper care and supervision, you can maintain your quality of life for quite some time." Barry leaned forward. "What kind of care and supervision?" "Well, he shouldn't be living alone anymore. He's going to need help with financial management, medication monitoring, meal planning. And as the condition progresses, he'll need more comprehensive care." "There's a facility we looked at," Barry said. "Golden Years Village. Do you think that would be appropriate?" Dr. Morrison pretended to consider this. "Eventually, yes, but not immediately. Right now, your father would benefit from a gradual transition. Perhaps someone could check on him daily, help him with bills and appointments, that sort of thing." "I could do that," Barry said quickly. "I could take over his financial management, make sure his bills get paid on time. That would be very helpful. In fact, you might want to consider getting legal guardianship established, just to make things easier as his condition progresses." Barry tried to hide his satisfaction, but I caught the slight smile that crossed his lips. "How would we go about that?" "I can provide a medical report supporting the need for guardianship. The courts are usually very accommodating when there's clear medical evidence of cognitive decline." As we left Dr. Morrison's office, Barry was practically bouncing with excitement. He waited until we were in his car before letting his mask slip completely. "Dad, I want you to know that I'm going to take care of everything from now on. You don't need to worry about bills or bank accounts or any of that complicated stuff anymore." "That's very kind of you, son." "It's not kind. It's what family does. And I think we should seriously consider moving you into Golden Years sooner rather than later." "Doctor, Morrison said your condition is going to get worse, and I don't want you to be alone when that happens." I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it would be better to make the move while I can still adjust to it." Barry reached over and patted my hand. "You're being very brave about this, Dad. Mom would be proud of how you're handling it." The mention of Margaret made my chest tighten with anger, but I forced myself to stay in character. "I hope so. I just want to make sure everything is handled properly. Don't worry about that. I'll take care of everything." That evening, Barry came to my house with a briefcase full of documents. He spread them out on the kitchen table with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. "These are just some forms to make the transition easier," he explained, pulling out a chair for me. "Power of attorney documents so I can handle your banking. Some insurance paperwork. A few things related to the house." I looked at the papers with what I hoped appeared to be confusion. There are so many of them. "I know it seems overwhelming, but most of it is just standard stuff. Here, let me show you where to sign." As Barry guided me through the documents, I realized he was having me sign away every remaining asset I had. The power of attorney was so broad it essentially gave him complete control over my finances. There were forms transferring my remaining bank accounts to a joint account with him as the primary holder. Even a document signing over my car. "What about the house?" I asked as I signed the last paper. "That's already taken care of, remember? You signed those papers months ago." Barry gathered up the documents with obvious satisfaction. "Dad, I want you to know how much this means to me, that you trust me to handle everything. You're my son. Of course I trust you." That night, after Barry left, I called David Harrison. "It's done," I said. "He has power of attorney, access to my accounts, everything." "Are you sure about this, Melvin? Once those documents are filed." "They won't be filed, David. at least not in the way Barry expects. I looked out my kitchen window at the house across the street, where I'd watched the neighbors' children grow up over the years. How long until we can spring the trap? Everything's ready on our end. Marcus has enough recorded evidence to bury Barry, and I've got the paperwork prepared to reverse everything. We just need Barry to make his final move. Which will be? Based on what you've told me, I think he's going to try to get you committed to Golden Years within the next week or two. Once you're there, he'll have complete control, and it'll be much harder for you to fight back. I thought about Sandra's tour, the locked doors, and patronizing staff. He's not getting me in there, David. No, he's not. But we need to let him think he's going to. The more confident he gets, the more likely he is to make a mistake. The mistake came sooner than I expected. The next morning, I was having coffee when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the kitchen window, I saw Barry getting out of his car with another man I didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing a suit, carrying a clipboard. They walked up to my front door, and Barry used his key to let himself in. He'd had a copy of my key for years, but hearing him use it without knocking felt like a violation. "Dad?" Barry called out. "I brought someone to meet you." I walked into the living room, where Barry was standing with the stranger. The man looked around my house with the appraising gaze of someone evaluating property. "Dad, this is Mr. Peterson from Golden Years Village. He came by to do a home assessment, see what kind of transition timeline we're looking at." Peterson smiled at me with the same patronizing expression I'd seen from Sandra. "Hello, Mr. Fletcher. Your son tells me you're interested in joining our community." "I suppose so," I said, letting my voice sound uncertain. "That's wonderful. I just need to ask you a few questions about your daily routine, your support system, that sort of thing." Peterson consulted his clipboard. "Are you currently managing your own finances?" Barry jumped in before I could answer. "Actually, I just took over all of that yesterday. Dad signed power of attorney papers. He was getting confused about bills and payments." "Excellent. That makes the transition much smoother." Peterson made a note. "And your living situation? Are you comfortable being alone in this large house?" "Sometimes I get a little nervous at night," I admitted. "It's so quiet." "Of course. That's very common." Peterson looked around the room again. "This is a beautiful home. Have you thought about what you'd like to do with it?" Again, Barry answered for me. "We've discussed selling it. The money could go toward Dad's care, and frankly, maintaining a house this size is becoming too much for him." Peterson nodded approvingly. "Very practical thinking. And you have medical documentation supporting the need for our level of care?" "Dr. Morrison diagnosed him with early-stage dementia yesterday," Barry said. "He's preparing a report for the admission process." "Perfect. Well, Mr. Fletcher, I think you'd be very happy at Golden Years. We have an opening coming up next week. One of our residents recently passed, and we haven't advertised the spot yet. If you're interested, I could hold it for you." Barry's eyes lit up. "That soon?" "Sometimes it's better to make the move quickly, before the patient has time to become anxious about it," Peterson explained. "We find that residents adjust better when the transition happens smoothly." I watched Barry's face as he considered this opportunity to get rid of me a week earlier than planned. The temptation was too much for him to resist. "What do you think, Dad? Ready to start your new adventure?" I looked around the living room where Margaret and I had spent so many evenings, where we'd celebrated Barry's birthdays and graduations, where I'd held her hand during her final days. Then I looked at my son, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the thought of getting me out of the way. "I suppose if you think it's best," I said quietly. "I do, Dad. I really do." Peterson made another note on his clipboard. "Excellent. I'll reserve the spot for you. We can schedule the move-in for next Friday." After they left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about what had just happened. In one conversation, Barry had arranged to have me institutionalized, sell my house, and gain complete control over what remained of my life. And he'd done it all while looking me in the eye and telling me he was doing it out of love. Margaret had been right about people showing you who they really are. Barry had just shown me exactly who he was, and it was time for me to show him exactly who I was in return. I picked up my phone and called David Harrison. "It's time," I said. "Barry just scheduled my imprisonment for next Friday. I think that gives us everything we need. Are you ready for this, Melvin? Once we do this, there's no going back." I thought about Margaret's roses blooming in the garden, about the home we'd built together, about the son we'd raised who had turned into a stranger willing to destroy his own father for money. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Friday morning came with brilliant sunshine, the kind of perfect autumn day that Margaret had always loved. I stood at my kitchen window watching the light filter through the maple trees in my backyard and felt a strange sense of peace. Today was the day Barry thought he was shipping me off to Golden Years Village. Instead, it was the day he would finally learn the cost of betraying family. At exactly 9 o'clock, David Harrison's car pulled into my driveway, followed by a second vehicle I didn't recognize. Through my window, I watched as David got out, along with Marcus Webb and 2 other men in dark suits. The cavalry had arrived. Barry wasn't expecting them until 10:30, when he planned to arrive with a van from Golden Years to collect me and my belongings. He'd called the night before, his voice full of fake sympathy, telling me to pack light because I wouldn't need much at my new home. "Are you ready for this?" David asked as I let them into my living room. "I've been ready for weeks." Marcus Webb opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "I've got everything we need right here. Audio recordings, video surveillance, financial records showing the systematic theft, plus the forged documents your attorney discovered." One of the men in suits stepped forward. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm Detective Morrison with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've reviewed all the evidence your investigator provided. I want you to know that what your son did to you, this isn't just civil fraud. This is criminal elder abuse, forgery, theft. We're talking about serious felony charges." I nodded, feeling the weight of what we were about to do. "Will he go to prison? With this evidence?" "Almost certainly. The systematic nature of the theft, the forged documents, the attempted guardianship fraud. A prosecutor's dream case." David checked his watch. "Barry should be here in about 20 minutes. Everyone clear on their positions?" The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Barry would arrive expecting to find a confused, compliant father ready to be whisked away to institutional care. Instead, he would find a room full of law enforcement officials and evidence of every crime he'd committed over the past year. At 10:25, I heard Barry's car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched him get out, followed by 2 workers from Golden Years Village carrying a wheelchair and some moving supplies. Barry looked excited, almost giddy. This was his moment of complete victory. He used his key to let himself in, calling out cheerfully as he entered. "Dad, the transport team is here. Ready for your big move?" "I'm in the living room," I called back. I heard Barry's footsteps stop abruptly as he entered the room and saw David, Detective Morrison, Marcus Webb, and the other officials waiting for him. The wheelchair-bound father he'd expected was sitting upright in his chair, completely alert, surrounded by evidence of Barry's crimes. "What's going on?" Barry's voice was tight, confused. His eyes darted around the room, trying to process the scene. Detective Morrison stood up, his badge visible on his belt. "Barry Fletcher, I'm Detective Morrison with the Metropolitan Police. We need to have a conversation." "About what?" Barry's face had gone pale, but he was still trying to maintain his innocent act. "Is my father okay?" "Your father is fine," David Harrison said, standing up from the couch. "In fact, he's more alert than he's been in weeks. Funny how quickly dementia symptoms can disappear when they were never real to begin with." I watched Barry's face as understanding began to dawn. His mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. "I don't understand. Dad, you were confused, having memory problems." "No, Barry. I was having son problems." I stood up, my voice steady and clear. "I was having problems with a son who stole from me, lied to me, and tried to have me locked away so he could take everything I had left." Barry's eyes darted to the documents spread across my coffee table. Even from where he stood, he could see his own signature on the forged papers, bank statements showing his theft, printed transcripts of recorded conversations. "This is some kind of mistake," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I was just trying to help you. The power of attorney, the financial management. You asked me to do that." Marcus Webb pressed a button on his tablet, and Barry's voice filled the room. "The admission process is just a formality. Once he's in Golden Years, I'll have complete control over everything. He'll never even know what hit him." Barry's face went white. "Where did you get that?" "Your father's house has been under surveillance for 2 weeks, Detective Morrison explained. "We have recordings of every conversation, every planning session, every moment when you thought you were manipulating a helpless old man." The detective pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Barry Fletcher, you're under arrest for elder abuse, financial fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. He began reading Barry the Miranda rights as my son stood frozen in the middle of my living room. "This can't be happening," Barry whispered. "Dad, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you wanted me to help you." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw not the little boy I'd raised, but a stranger who had tried to destroy me for money. "The only mistake I made was trusting you," I said quietly. As Detective Morrison placed handcuffs on Barry's wrists, my son's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand," he shouted, struggling against the restraints. "I needed that money. I was in debt. People were threatening me. I was going to pay it back once I got everything sorted out." "By putting me in a nursing home for the rest of my life?" I asked. Barry's face crumpled. "It wasn't supposed to be forever, just until I could get back on my feet." "And when exactly were you planning to let me out of my prison, Barry? When you'd spent all of your mother's money? When you'd sold every memory she left behind?" For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in Barry's eyes, but it was too late for remorse. As the police led Barry toward the door, he turned back to me one last time. "I'm your son," he said, his voice breaking. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I thought about all the years I'd loved him, supported him, believed in him. I thought about Margaret holding him as a baby, teaching him to walk, crying with pride at his graduation. I thought about the man we'd raised and the stranger he'd become. "You stopped being my son the day you decided I was worth more to you dead than alive," I said. After they were gone, I sat alone in my living room for the first time in weeks without feeling afraid. David was handling the legal paperwork to reverse all the fraudulent transfers. Marcus Webb was preparing a comprehensive report for the district attorney. Dr. Morrison was writing a new evaluation confirming my complete mental competency. But beyond all the legal restoration, something more important had been restored: my sense of self-worth. The next morning, Claire called. Her voice was shaking, barely above a whisper. "Mr.
Fletcher, I just heard about Barry. I had no idea. I swear to you, I didn't know about any of this." "I believe you, Claire. The police said he'd been stealing from you for months, that he tried to have you committed. How could I have been married to someone and not known who he really was?" I thought about her question for a long time before answering. Because Barry was very good at being whoever people needed him to be. He was the perfect son when I needed comfort after Margaret died. He was the perfect fiancé when you needed someone stable and caring. The problem is, none of it was real. "I'm filing for annulment," she said quietly. "I can't stay married to someone who could do this to their own father." "I'm sorry, Claire. You deserved better than this. So did you." 3 weeks later, I received a letter from Barry. He was being held without bail, facing a trial that would likely send him to prison for 7 to 10 years. The letter was full of apologies, explanations, and pleas for forgiveness. He wrote about his gambling addiction, about the pressure he'd felt to succeed, about how sorry he was for everything that had happened. But buried in the middle of all his remorse was a single line that told me everything I needed to know about whether Barry had truly changed. "If you would just drop the charges, I promise I'll get help and pay back every penny." He still didn't understand. He thought this was about money. I threw the letter away without finishing it. 2 months after Barry's arrest, I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew me. I sold the house where Margaret and I had spent 30 years of marriage. Not because I was forced to, not because I couldn't maintain it, but because I wanted a fresh start. I bought a small cottage in Vermont, near a lake where Margaret and I had vacationed in happier times. The cottage has a garden where I'm learning to grow vegetables, something I never had time for when I was working. I've joined a book club at the local library and started volunteering at a literacy program for adults. For the first time in decades, my life belongs entirely to me. Last week, I got a call from David Harrison. Barry had been sentenced to 8 years in prison. His gambling debts had destroyed any chance of paying restitution, so the court had ordered him to forfeit all assets, including Claire's engagement ring and the funds remaining from their wedding. "How do you feel about it?" David asked. I looked out my cottage window at the lake, where an elderly couple was walking their dog along the shore. The man was helping his wife navigate around a fallen branch on the path, their movements careful and considerate of each other. "I feel free," I said. Barry had taught me something valuable in the end, though not in the way he'd intended. He taught me that family isn't just about blood relations or shared memories. Real family is about people who see your worth not in terms of what you can give them, but in terms of who you are. I may have lost a son,
But I gained something far more precious. I gained myself back. The roses I planted behind my cottage are blooming now, deep red like Margaret's favorites. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I imagine I can smell her perfume among the petals. I think she would approve of the man I've become, the strength I found when I needed it most. Barry made his choice when he decided to see me as a source of money rather than a source of love. In the end, that choice cost him everything: his freedom, his marriage, his future, and his father. But it gave me something invaluable, the knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to walk away. I sleep peacefully now, in a bed I chose, in a house I own, surrounded by the silence of my own making. And for the first time since Margaret died, I'm not afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.